Okay, so today is November 22nd, 2021, and Luis Barragán died on November 22nd in 1988. And after him, I will make a presentation about Mark Foster Gage, who was born on November 22nd, but 15 years before Luis Barragán died. Of course, we all know about Luis Barragán, one of the very important architects of modernity. And of course, he received the Pritzker Prize as well. I found these words, preparing the material about him, mystery and serenity. And, somehow that these two words do not come often together. You wouldn't think too much about, Apollo bringing mystery in, or mystery bringing serenity in. But maybe in the case of his work, they are appropriate. Although, in my opinion, Luis Barragán knew something about the Jungian shadow. I don't think, and in fact, his photographs show it. I don't think he ignored the dark side of the soul, so to speak. Here is a picture of him. Well, sorry for the resolution. I wish it was a larger picture. Anyway, he also practiced, besides architecture, he also did landscape architecture. He was lucky to be born affluent. He had the money to live like an aristocrat and to even build for himself. This is what he said: architecture is an art when one consciously or unconsciously creates aesthetic emotion in the atmosphere, and when this environment produces well-being. Now, this statement would certainly provoke sarcasm and certainly opposition from someone like Peter Eisenman, who thought that the architecture that moves us is not the architecture that comforts us. But Luis Barragán seems to think differently. Although, in my opinion, it depends, maybe sometimes someone who is actually devoured by psychic monsters longs for serenity and well-being, and someone who is spoiled by, very, auspicious conditions aspires to the very opposite, towards the very opposite. It is possible. He was a solitary man, and I tried to decipher his inner life through the photographs I looked at, and also through the architecture he built. Yes, a mysterious man in a way, and there is something else. In the way Hollywood presents Mexico, and the way former president of the United States presented Mexico as being a country of, drug dealers and thieves and so on, it's not true at all. I had been in Mexico, and I have to say it's a very old culture. Of course, they have problems like any other country. But, to dismiss a whole country in the name of essentially some accidents, and to ignore its past and its complex culture is wrong. Luis Barragán was probably one of the last aristocrats in architecture, using the word aristocrat in the most noble way and subtle way as well. This is what he said: and all architecture which does not express serenity fails in its spiritual mission. Thus, it has been a mistake to abandon the shelter of walls for the inclemency of large areas of glass. Me too. I am also an adversary of large areas of glass. I think the demagogy of glass should find in us, should find us in a position of resistance. It is incredible how easily we get misled by glass, by its fake promises. Most people today, they continue, fortunately, the climate change and the sustainability problems and so on, force us to reconsider our walls. But still in the present, architects use very large surfaces of glass. And glass is misleading indeed. You cannot talk about sustainability and have a lot of glass. I mean, this was even said by Philip Johnson, who lived in a glass house. It was even called the glass house. And he said, if you are concerned about the bills, the electricity bills and the energy bills, you don't build walls of glass. Anyway, and he was very rich, and still he noticed what glass does to a building. But Barragán here talks also about the spiritual mission. Well, how many architects today talk about the spiritual mission of their buildings? I don't think too many, no. Now, certainly not the guru of architecture, as many describe Rem Koolhaas, and not certainly the so-called yogi of architecture, as many would describe Bjarke Ingels. They do not talk about the spiritual mission of architecture, as if spirit does not exist, as if the contemplative side of life does not exist. Well, it does exist, still barely, but it does exist. Anyway, so here is again this nobleman of architecture from Mexico. So let's read a little bit about him. Luis Ramiro Barragán Morfín, interesting, this last name, Morfín, was born in March in 1902 and died on November 22nd, 1988, was a Mexican architect and engineer. Actually, from what I know, he was trained as an engineer. His work has influenced contemporary architects visually and conceptually. Barragán's buildings are frequently visited by international students and professors of architecture. He studied as an engineer in his hometown while undertaking the entirety of additional coursework to obtain the title of architect. Barragán won the Pritzker Prize, the highest award in architecture, in 1980, and his personal home, the Luis Barragán House and Studio, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2004. Barragán was born in Guadalajara, in Jalisco, Mexico, educated as an engineer. He graduated from the Escuela Libre de Ingenieros in Guadalajara in 1923. After graduation, he traveled through Spain and France. While in France, he became aware of the writings of Ferdinand Bach, a German-French writer, designer, and artist who Barragán cited throughout his life. In 1931, he again traveled to France with a long stopover in New York. In this trip, he met Mexican mural painter Jose Clemente Orozco, architectural magazine editors, and Frederick Kissler. Frederick Kissler was born in Romania, well, in Cernăuți. And he lived in Bucharest, and he left Romania when he was 20-something. He grew up here, and we don't talk about him. Surprise, surprise. In France, he briefly met Le Corbusier and finally visited the gardens realized by Ferdinand Bach. He practiced architecture in Guadalajara from 1927 to 1936, and in Mexico City thereafter. This was the man, always very elegant, as you can see, his iron shirt. I wish I had such a shirt. I had, but many years ago, not any longer. For a lot of time, I didn't have such shirts, nor a beautiful scarf. He was an aristocrat, it's obvious. Anyway, always elegant, very elegant. Okay. Hello, Mr. Barragán. We are sorry you died, but you had a long life, and it happened you died on the very day when the very different Mark Foster Gage was born, November 22nd. Some drawings of Luis Barragán. His drawings are, I would say they have an innocence which probably is explainable in part by the fact that he didn't really study architecture. I mean, someone who studied architecture in a school, in a university for many years, with some difficulties draws like this, because this is a very pure, innocent, almost childlike drawing. And architects with a lot of training tend to forget this kind of drawing. You know, some watercolor and some marker, perhaps. Now, it's very possible that just like Le Corbusier, he did this drawing after the building was built. The sketches of Le Corbusier, it seems, were done, some of them at least, a posteriori, meaning after the buildings were built. Anyway, an interesting architect. And if he was an engineer, he was also a poet. He was not flamboyant. His architecture is an architecture of reticence and deep thinking and deep feeling. He also refused the temptations of excessive whiteness. He used a lot of color. Of course, Mexico in general loves color. So Legoretta also works chromatically in very rich ways. Something, you know, other parts of the world should learn too. There is some whiteness here and there, but the colors of Barragán are well known. Now, Las Arboledas from north of Mexico City, 1955, 1961. This is a beautiful work, extremely abstract, and you know, you wonder about the metaphysics of this building. I mean, this surface of water is, you know, black as it is, you know, attacking the, you know, the entrance, the blue entrance into the building is abstract poetry. He loved horses. He perhaps, you know, was the owner of various horses. I don't know, but he loved horses. And some of the buildings were built for horses. So this is from 1955, approximately, so mid-century architecture in a country which does know a lot actually about art and architecture, even modern architecture. Certainly more than the former president of the United States, who, you know, surrounded himself with goldness and goldness again, as if we live in, I don't know which century, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, if not 5,000 years ago. Anyway, this kind of aesthetics impresses one through its, you know, sublime simplicity and the poetry of less is more. The house of the architect, which we read about, becoming the you know, UNESCO site, the Barragán house in Mexico City, 1947, 1948. So immediately after the Second World War. It's not a small house, as you can see. You see here there is in plan, there is a stair which leads into a wall. You know, it's, I mean, it's, well, it's a wall at a certain level, but at the top there is a door I don't know if that door functions. Let me see if I have the plan. No, it's not this door. It's not this stair. It's another one. Um, a stair which would perplex the architect who works with Ernest Neufert on the table. Let me see. So again, you know, this is the house of someone well-to-do. It's a house that not everybody can build for himself or herself. He was a master of handling light and color, and essentially the poetry of his buildings are about, you know, this, and maybe space. Towards the outside, the building is rather almost anonymous. You wouldn't say that this is a great building unless you knew that this was built by Luis Barragán. You know, and the outside is not telling almost anything about what is happening inside. But this is the reticence of Luis Barragán. He didn't want in any way to communicate towards the outside, you know, the complexity and the richness of his architecture. So he built it between 1947 1948. There are all kinds of aspects to this house. There are the exterior spaces are also very important, not just the house itself, and the courtyards, the small courtyards, and the colors employed, and the beauty of the walls. This is the stair in the library that I was mentioning. I don't know where this leads to. I didn't see the second floor plan. But you see, there is no handrail here. This is a stair where later he placed books on. So apparently he didn't use it as a, you know, as a stair. Here is a painting that looks like almost like a painting by Mark Rothko. There is a certain spirituality and a certain almost religiosity in his interiors. They make me think somehow of Vermeer, the great Dutch painter, not so much in this living room, which is, you know, more, you know, accommodating perhaps the function of inviting people over and so on. I guess he didn't like too much handrails or parapets, because you see this stair doesn't have one either. Or to use the words of Rem Koolhaas, the paraphernalia of protection. So this is the house, you know, with the big garage for 2 cars, I guess, there. But the building looks, again, if you didn't know it was built by a famous architect, you would pass by it without paying much attention. Was he a functionalist? Well, yes, to an extent he was. But maybe in his case, we can also talk about a lyrical functionalist. Well, yes, there is a door here which does lead into a, I don't know what it is, maybe a study room or something from the library. Let's look back at the, yeah. But I have seen picture where he placed books here on this stair. And so I guess he didn't use it for that function. So this is the second floor. Lots of stairs there. 1, 2, 3, 4 stairs just in this this part of the building. This stair also doesn't look too solid, actually, or too rigid. I myself would be a little bit hesitant to use it in order to arrive at the door. Anyway, you can see the street elevation in time received various colors, but its geometry was not modified. I like these phones. I wish we had phones like these again. I'm tired of the mobile phone. I'm really tired of the mobile phone. With this kind of phone, you know exactly where it is. You have no anxiety when you hear a ring, but with a mobile phone, you can jump from where you are, even if someone else's mobile phone rings. Anyway, essentially, he lived alone, I think. I don't know if he had a family, really. I never saw a picture of him with a wife or children or anything. Interesting also the presence of the curtain outdoors. Just like Le Corbusier, Louis Barragán loved, these, how to call them, these vases, this made of clay. Yeah, Le Corbusier, when he took a journey to Southeast Europe, he wrote in Journey to the East, he actually wrote, I think he was in Romania at that time, that he shipped to Switzerland a lot of objects like this one that he purchased in Serbia, former Yugoslavia. Maybe he purchased them from Romania too, I don't know. Yes, there is, in a way, those two words that we read together, the beginning, mystery and serenity, are probably appropriate to describe the architecture of Luis Barragán. Widely recognized for his emphasis on color, light, shadow, form, and texture, it can only be expected that the former residence of Pritzker Prize winner Luis Barragán encompasses all of his trademarks. On its street in Mexico City, the stark facade of the house humbly blends in with its neighbors, giving no hints to the personality of its interior. The most prominent aspects of the design of Casa Barragán are the use of flat planes and light, both natural and artificial. The skylights and windows allow for visual tracking of light throughout the day. The floods of natural light and views of nature are the key purposes of the windows. Opening up into the garden, the back of the house creates a visible and physical relationship between the lower level and the backyard. Barragán often called himself a landscape architect because he placed as much emphasis on the exterior and surroundings of a building as he did on the interior. And here I would say that we are now at a time when perhaps we should follow Barragán's example, because I think we need more gardens and parks and trees and grass and bushes than buildings actually. So while in the past we designed the house, and then if we had some more time and some more money, we pay some attention to the space around the house. But we always began with the house, and afterwards, almost like an afterthought, we made a garden. But what if now we start with the garden instead and build the house afterwards to match the garden? Because we need the garden desperately. We need more oxygen. We need what is called sustainability. We need green. We need trees. We need nature more than buildings. I know that this is difficult to tell architects, but if we love the world, and if we love life, and if we love the earth, perhaps we should change our priorities and be like Barragán. Maybe we should all train to be landscape architects. There is a university, at least a university in the United States, which it's the one in Cincinnati, Ohio, which has part of the architecture school, a horticulture department. And perhaps we should have the inspiration to bring into the architecture schools horticulture as well. And even ruralism. What if we start a school of ruralism and not just having urbanism? Why only urbanism? As if the world is made only of cities. It's absurd. In fact, Rem Koolhaas was right. Half of the world is made up of villages, of rural areas. Well, why is it that we only have, the section or the department or the faculty of urbanism, but there is no faculty or section or department of ruralism? Why? Upon entering, the visitor walks down a dark hallway until they suddenly encounter a pink wall, the first engagement with the known style of Barragán. The only function of this main room is to use the telephone, but it is still characteristically lit and decorated with simply a chair and a table, neither of which have changed location in the last 50 years. The double height space of the main room is separated only by lower partition walls, which separate the space into different areas. On the roof, a window is accentuated by the use of wooden girders. Now, you would say it just happens that, the structure of the window is a cross. But its simplicity, its minimalism, its discreteness, and yet you can notice it, makes me, wonder. I mean, he believed in spirit. We read his words, and but he's discreet. He's not demagogical. There is no rhetoric here of any sort. Interesting also the presence of this object here, this furniture, which displays, artworks and books and so on. This was an architect, an intellectual. He was a man of culture. And yeah, the play of privacy and visibility are seen throughout the front and back halves of the house. Towards the front, high windows are used to let light in but maintain privacy, whereas large windows open up the back to the garden. Since the back of the house opens up to private space as opposed to the public street at the front of the house, Barragán is able to manipulate the windows accordingly. Barragán had a fascination with animals, particularly horses. So many relics of popular culture and symbols are found throughout the house. Crosses can also be found in multiple rooms, which, coupled with the bold colors used by Barragán, create a mythical and spiritual architecture. He found many of his furnishings at craft markets and antique shops, all true to the cultural identity of Mexico. This cultural flair is also apparent in the bold pink, yellow, and lilac colors chosen by the architect. The minimalist style gives reason to the significance of detail. Every aspect of the house has its purpose and is obviously planned by the architect. The purist upstairs led visitors through the other stories of the house towards private bedroom and studio spaces. The colors and simplistic designs are carried out throughout each level. Maybe it should have been translated simple, not simplistic. Even out onto the terraces and roof. Barragán discovers a poetry in architecture straying from the standard and conventional line and creating a unique style that distinguishes who he is as a person and an architect. He fuses his personal experiences, dreams, and memories into a physical experience that is shared throughout cultures and ages. Luis Barragán accepted the Pritzker Prize in 1980. Upon his death in 1988, Casa Barragán, we already read this, became a museum to be enjoyed by the public. The house became one of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites in 2004. Now we look at some gardens because we remember he considered himself rather a landscape architect. Jardins del Pedregal subdivision, Mexico City. I think he built here, if my memory is good, he built for himself, actually. I think he owned this land. Anyway, it is a remarkable landscape, allowing nature to flourish in all its richness. I personally like more the landscape than the building, but anyway, I'm not even sure if he designed these buildings as well. A chapel from 1954, 1960. This is also a remarkable architecture. The plan is very simple, but that serenity and mystery that was mentioned at the beginning, they are both very present here. And you are going to see images very soon. With the simplest means, and I wouldn't use the word simplistic, he does realize this, he does obtain magic. Even in the spaces which are, adjacent in a way, and they are not, liturgical or anything, but there is a transition from the outside towards the interior of the chapel that is conducive to, having a certain attitude, lowering your head, so to speak, a little bit, at least a little bit. This is a magnificent picture. You have a nun praying and you have the cross, which is reduced to its essentials, and the colors and the light. it's, the ideology of religion is absent. We are here at the level of essences. A deeply felt spirituality should be like this. Also interestingly that she's actually praying facing the shadow of the cross and not the cross itself. The cross is a side, rather discreet. And then the light, the glory of light, which itself is spirit and God sent, if I can say so. And what about the pink cross? Some would think it's sacrilegious, but not in Mexico. In Mexico, pink is a very important color. And then who knows, maybe some kind of an impossible or unexpected marriage between spirituality and sensuality. Why not? But the color of the cross changes depending on the light that comes through that window. So here is the cross, and here is that vertical window. The chapel per se is here. And truly his idea, to call himself a landscape architect, what if, even when designing a building, we would design it, from positioning ourselves as landscape architects? I think it would be very interesting. It depends what we understand by landscape. What about the inner landscape, the psychological landscape? And another house from 1955, also in Mexico City. Sorry about this picture. Yeah, I don't know. I hope I have another plan, but if you can bear with me to look at this, difficult image, just contemplate it if you can for a few seconds. Yeah, it's hard to, sorry. He was very immersed in the culture and the aesthetics of his own country. As you can see, even this color, the pink that is present, abundantly in his work. Is his architecture critical regionalism? Perhaps, although the word critical is maybe a little bit harsh in his case. Now, if you build such a house today in 2021, you know, it would be published as being a very contemporary example of architecture today. It was built in 1955. He was not only a landscape architect, he was also in a certain way a decorator. He loved to decorate his own house with objects he found in, I don't know, in antique shops, in flea markets and so on. So his feminine side, I think, if I am to call it so, was very active and creative and assertive. The gardens from the same, I don't know what that is, the subdivision in Guadalajara, the Bosque, but I don't have pictures with this one, sorry. Now we arrive at a different work which he did in collaboration with Matthias Göritz, another important presence in Mexico in the field of architecture, landscape architecture and art. The Torres de Satellite from 1957 to 1958. These are, you have seen them probably, especially in colors, but you know, maybe at the first encounter with them, you wouldn't expect them to be so monumental, so big. Here are the people who actually contributed to this work. Luis Barragán, Matthias Göritz, and Jesus Reis. Yes, mausoleums. It was, this is a work I have, I don't know if I did the right thing here. I included in this presentation a work which is paying homage to these three people by other architects, younger architects, Espacio Cero, mausoleums for Barragán, Göritz, and Reis, the interior forgotten space of the Torres de Satellite in Mexico City, become mausoleums where could be located the remains of Luis Barragán, Matthias. It's a speculative project, Matthias Göritz and Chucho Reis, to commemorate their artistic legacy. Emotional architecture is a style of modernist architecture conceived in the 1950s that embrace space, color, and light, creating buildings that encourage meditation and reflection. It was conceived by the Mexican architect Luis Barragán and the sculptor and painter Matthias Göritz, who were frustrated by the cold functionalism of modernism. In 1954, Barragán and Göritz published the Emotional Architecture Manifesto, in which they argued that architecture needs to be spiritually uplifting. I myself published an article online for Architectural Association with the title, I Feel, Therefore I Am. Because we think too much, or we think, we allow the brain to take over the other functions of ourselves. And many times, unfortunately, we forget about emotions. So I think the point that Barragán made through emotional architecture is a needed one and a correct one. The Torres de Satellite, the satellite towers, Mexico's first urban sculptures and great example of emotional architecture, had its planning started in 1957 with the ideas of Luis Barragán, painter Jesus Reis Ferreira, and Matthias Göritz. The project was originally planned to be composed of 7 towers, with the tallest one reaching a height of 200 meters, about 650 feet, but a budget reduction forced the design to be composed of only 5 towers, with the tallest measuring 52 meters and the shortest 30 meters. So you can imagine from 200 meters to 52 meters, but I'm glad they were still built. Anyway, this is the project of these young architects who wanted to pay homage and to place the remains of these three, the creators of the satellite towers, within the towers. With all this in mind, we proposed, the authors of this project, we proposed to use the interior space of the satellite towers as mausoleums for place the urns of Barragán, Göritz, and Rice to commemorate the great artistic legacy. For each tower of the urban sculpture is assigned an internal function that does not alter its artistic and social nature, but that activates a sequential procession through the space, through the square. The lower tower, the Tower of Silence, contains a chapel that keeps the mystical religious spirit of its creators. Three towers, red, blue, and white, are dedicated as mausoleums for Luis Barragán, Matthias Göritz, and Jesus Reis, the towers of remembrance where the urns are located. So it's a commemorative architecture. They tried, the authors of this project, to advance within the towers that these three people built. The tallest tower, the Tower of Sound, offers a place where people can see the entire city as a symbol of mystical ascent. These are images during the construction of these towers. So, the authors of these projects wanted to place the remains of, like for Barragán here, and then Matthias Göritz here, and Jesus Reis here. This is a sophisticated symbolic architecture, abstract, and you look on the left, an advertising for beer, on the right for Chevrolet. It's all the commercialism of today's life. But these towers proclaim something else, and that's why those people who made the project, they were inspired by the different values of these 5 towers. And here is the plan. It looks simple, but it's actually rather complex. As you can see, sorry, I wish the picture was larger. In a way, what we see here are the 2 halves of art that Charles Baudelaire talked about. On the left and on the right, we see, the mobility of today's life, and also the ephemerality, the transitoriness. And then these towers, in a way, proclaim something about the eternal and the immutable. So we have mobility, and then we have the immobility of other values and other meanings. Now, Mexico City is a huge city. I think its population is close to the population of Romania. Cuadra, San Cristobal, Los Clubs, Mexico City, 1968. This is also a beautiful work, very poetical, and with a great affection for horses, as we already know he had. in a way, there is spirituality here as well. I would say very much so. Perhaps the house of God is everywhere if we have eyes to see it and hearts to feel it. Also, here again, we have an interplay between mobility and immobility. The walls are immobile, but then the running water is, expressing ephemerality and the continuous movement, and also the horses. So all in all, we have the two halves of art in the vision of Charles Baudelaire. These are spaces for contemplation. These buildings are made for contemplation. They also serve a function, but I would say vita contemplativa is very much present everywhere, actually, in everything he built. And I think he understood that you cannot have vita activa, the active life, in the absence of contemplative life, vita contemplativa. And this is why spirit is present in his work, because he didn't neglect contemplation. Now, these artworks were brought there probably after he died, but they do say that somehow these spaces are conducive to inviting art in, exactly because they support, they sustain contemplation. I like to think that these are the happiest horses in the world. Why? Because they are surrounded by beauty and even spirit. I think Luis Barragán knew something about introversion, about the value of introversion, and how else could you have contemplation without introversion? But as an architect, even as a landscape architect, he built for people. So he opened outwardly, but he also did so upon perhaps many minutes and many hours and many days of, of a dialogue with himself. As that picture showed clearly. Now, a house from 1975 to 1977, another famous building by him. This picture is shown everywhere all the time with this piece of water inside the house, and the magical play between color and light. It's again a space for contemplation. This is its function. And indeed, mystery and serenity are together here as well. There is no unnecessary drama. There is enough drama, discrete though, of the light. Beautiful play with colors as well, because yellow and blue are, well, Newton would have said is, opposite to blue is orange, but in more mystical times and societies, the opposite of blue was yellow. And here we have the opposition between blue and yellow. You move through a yellow corridor towards a blue wall animated by light. It's a mystical experience done, obtained with simple means, but very refined. So this is the corridor we looked at. Let's look again. We remember there was a similar corridor in the chapel that we looked at, also painted in yellow and leading towards the chapel per se. Here is leading towards that room, the connector as it is called here. Not sure I read correctly. No, it's the corridor number 10, but number 8. Anyway, an interesting house. And again, abstractness plays a significant role, but it's not cold abstractness, it's emotional abstractness or abstraction. This is a thinking architecture. I mean, it is an emotional architecture, but it's also a thinking architecture of a thinking architect. And when I say thinking, I mean true thinking, which does not reject emotions, deeply felt emotions, maybe silent emotions. So he built this house 12 years before he died in 1988. So he was over 70 when he built it. There is no bravado in this building. This is not an architect who tries to impress through, flamboyant means at all. Perhaps we can talk about the wisdom of Luis Barragán. Now Rocket Club from 1980, 1976, 1988. So we remember he died in 1988. In my opinion, this building is less accomplished than the previous one. I don't know exactly if he was the only one responsible for this building. Here I see some, folkish elements which are really not part of his repertoire. Who knows? He was already 8 years old. Anyway, this building, in my opinion, is less a pure Luis Barragán than the previous one, and then the previous ones. And I end the presentation. I think this is, yes, the last picture of this commemorative presentation with the architect, again, alone in nature, the nature he loved the most. And an interesting engineer, no doubt, an engineer who was an artist.